Good evening, everyone. My name is Judy Blake, and I am a program coordinator for Family to Family Network. I am joined by my brilliant, amazing colleague, Leslie Lawson.
Hello, everybody.
So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Go Astros. When is their next game, Leslie? Is it Friday
Saturday,
night?
I believe.
Oh,
Friday
Saturday.
night. Friday night.
Friday night. Okay. So we're hoping the Astros win. So we are going to discuss tonight what to do if you disagree. Use your procedural safeguards. So next slide, please. Just remember, this is a very safe place. There's a lot of information that we're covering. And some of the information we've already discussed in the previous two sessions. And we realize that we may be repeating ourselves. It's not that we're doing that because we think you don't understand. It's just we're doing that because some people, this is the first time they're joining, or they might need to hear it additional times to really understand. Feel free to ask any questions. If you don't feel comfortable at the end when we have Q&A, no worries. You can always private message Leslie or myself. And if you speak Spanish, you can always private message Myrna or Ana Maria, and they will let us know what your question is. Please make sure that you mute yourself so that everyone can hear the presentation. We should be finished within about an hour. And hopefully, when we do that, this will be a lot more clear to you what we are discussing. The slides in the presentation will be sent to you probably sometime next week. We have got to get people to complete the survey, and then we will go ahead and send the slides. So we want you to remember that you know your child better than anyone else. You have many rights as a parent in the special education process. It's really, really important that you learn those rights. We've talked about this before, and your child is entitled by law to a free and appropriate education. We call it FAPE, F-A-P-E for short. And it requires schools to provide special education to meet the unique needs of your child. Now, that's not to say that everything you ask you're going to get, but it needs to be customized to meet your child's needs. Next slide, please. So schools must follow IDEA, and we've discussed this before, but for those who might need a refresher, IDEA stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is federal law. So what Leslie and I are telling you, it's not up to Family Network. Leslie and I didn't create this. This is what the federal law is. It's really important that you read it, you learn it, and you take it with you to every meeting. And the reason for that is because if you walk in the meeting with the IDEA manual in hand, I can almost guarantee that the members of the ARD committee will realize, you've done your homework, you know your rights, and you're going to make sure that everything is being followed. If you need to, you can download this document. It's in English and Spanish, and it's also in Vietnamese, and we have listed the links for you there. We can't stress the importance enough that knowing what is in this manual will help you so much in navigating your ARD meetings. So the IEP, it's an individualized education program. Some people say it's an individualized education plan. And that's the centerpiece, that's the cornerstone of that federal legislation that we were talking about, the IDEA. So when you have your ARD meetings, we want to make sure that your child is more than just paper. They're more than just the documents that you're receiving. The purpose of IDEA is to make sure that children with disabilities are receiving that free, appropriate public education, and that it's emphasizing special education and related services so that your child is having their unique needs met, and it is preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living. So you need to really think of the IEP as a contract. It's a contract between you and the school. And it's your role as a parent when you develop your child's individualized education plan to always understand what you're agreeing to. You know, we would never sign a lease, a credit card agreement. We would never sign any document without understanding what the details are. And the IEP, it follows the same rules. Make sure you understand what you're signing. And if you don't, ask questions. Next slide, please. So you want to get ready. And what should you do before the ARD meeting? Make sure that you get those draft copies of evaluations, present levels. You can ask, I would say, about 3 to 4 days ahead of time. You need to know where your child is at. What are they proposing for goals and objectives? Does your child have a behavior plan? My son never did, but some kids do. Are there any other related services that your child is receiving? Maybe they're getting speech therapy. Maybe they're getting occupational therapy. Make sure that you get those reports beforehand so that you can review them and discuss them at the ARD meeting if you have any questions. You want to make sure that you know what people are talking about. It's really an important part of the process, because if you don't have all of the information, it's virtually impossible to get ready. And then when they're discussing everything in the meeting, how do you know if you can agree or not if you're not understanding and prepared? Next slide, please. So it's meeting time. If possible, try not to go to a meeting alone. You don't have to bring an advocate with you, but try to bring a friend, a relative, just someone that can be a second set of ears and eyes for you. Leslie and I have had our share of ARD meetings, right, Leslie? Yep, Leslie's shaking her head, yes. We've had more than we care to think about. And we know that they can be really overwhelming because you have several people from the school district there, and then it's you. And if your loved one's parent or guardian or another caregiver can't go with you, bring a friend, just someone for moral support. I think it's also really important that you might want to send an email beforehand, maybe meet with them ahead of time to let them know, that person who's going to be with you, what your concerns are. Let them know what your questions are going to be. Maybe they can be in charge of taking notes. Maybe they can be helping you follow the ARD agenda. The goal is to have them support you during the meeting. I think it's really important to also make sure that your child is at the meeting. Granted, when they turn 14 or in high school, whichever comes first, they should be present at the meeting. And I'm not saying necessarily for the whole time. My son came for maybe the first 15, 20 minutes, and then he wanted to leave, and that was okay with me. But he needs, or she needs, to be a part of the process. Again, you want the ARD committee to see your child for who they are and not just someone on paper. So even if they're in kindergarten or first grade, have them come for 10 minutes. Let them share what their hobbies are, what their interests are, what their favorite subjects are. My son always loved lunch. That was his favorite time. And I think it's really important. We think it's important that the ARD committee meet your child. Even if they're nonverbal, please know that your child and their presence makes a huge difference. Sometimes I think that parents think, oh, my child's not verbal, so what can they say? Well, they better be having adaptive technology. And if not, this is the perfect time to be bringing it up. Maybe your child can use the technology to speak. Maybe they can draw something. But let the committee see who your child is. This can help prepare your child for the day when they're required to attend those meetings, which begins in high school. Next slide, please. So during the meeting, please ask questions. Stay calm. I loved this. Stay calm, show me your data. I thought that was kind of a fun little advertisement there. But it's okay to ask questions. You have a right to know. And if you don't understand something, make sure you know what they mean. If English is your second language, please email them ahead of time and make sure that you ask for an interpreter. You have the right to have the information in your native language. Ask for data to support the decision that's being made or how that data is being collected. And ask for support if you need it. Remember that if you ask a yes or no question, chances are you're going to get a yes or no answer. So we think it's really best to ask, open-ended questions. What is it going to take to help my child complete assignments? What is it going to take to make sure that my child is included in regular education classes with support? How can my child receive speech therapy? Or if they're getting speech therapy, how can they receive more speech therapy? But these types of questions, they have the ARD members thinking and helping to brainstorm those solutions. We know that it can be very emotional at ARD meetings. If possible, please try to stay calm. You want them to show you the data, collect it, show it, and explain it to you. Next slide, please, Leslie. So document. This is so important. You want to make sure that everything you do is in writing. And if the school wants to call you, if the teacher sees you in the carpool line or when you're coming to pick up your loved one and verbally tells you something, that's fine. Just make sure that when you get home, you email the teacher and just let them know you want to confirm what they've told you. You want to make sure that you understood what they said and to make sure that they realize you understand what they're saying. If it's not written down, it may not have happened. You know it happened, but really everything must be in writing. And even in the ARD meeting, if you say something, it's okay to say to them, please make sure this is in the ARD minutes. And the reason for that is, at the end of the day, what is written is all you have to rely on. You don't want to get in the middle of he said, she said, I said. If it's written, everybody is on the same page. So your procedural safeguards, we have discussed that before, and we're going to go into it a little bit more. But you want to make sure that you read and highlight those procedural safeguards regarding prior written notice. You must know your rights on page 2 and what is required when the school proposes or refuses to do a service. Make sure that is in writing. Next slide, Leslie. And this is the part where Leslie is going to take over. Thank you, Leslie.
Okay, so I wanted to get, I like to tell stories. I hope that's okay, but we
really love stories.
It really makes you think. So I was talking with a parent, and they had an ARD meeting, and they didn't get copies of everything ahead of time. The school didn't send them, and so mom got in there, and and, it was overwhelming. And so they talked about a lot of things. And then mom thought they were tabling the R, which means it wasn't ending yet. It wasn't in agreement or disagreement. It was, we're going to come back and finish this later. If that happens, make sure that's documented, because then when she went back to finish it, they were trying to say that the second ARD was not a continuation of the first ARD, it was the disagreement ARD. And that matters because there are timelines in place. So for instance, if your child is in one placement and you disagree, when you're in disagreement, you only have 5 school days to invoke what's called stay put. You have to file for due process, which doesn't mean you go to due process, but if you want your child to stay in the same placement. So it's really important to document. Can you please put that in the minutes? And I familiarize yourself with the R document. Before you get ready to go to your next IEP meeting, take your last IEP document and go over it, because they're probably not going to give you anything to go on right then. And you want to make sure everything's filled in. I saw another IEP and they didn't even have a PLAF. They said they had just put a statement in about the child hadn't been in school, so we couldn't develop a PLAF, which is totally wrong. And make sure it's all filled out. If there's supposed to be an autism supplement, make sure it's filled out, and make sure if you ask a question and they say, yeah, we can do that, and Miss So-and-so is going to do that, make sure it's documented somewhere, because 2 weeks from now, they're not going to remember that. And if it's not being done, you need to say, well, it says right here. So I can't stress that enough. And also, like what Judy said, following up with emails, because a lot of times we think we hear something, we think we're all on the same page, and we're not. So definitely do that. Okay, back to prior written notice. So they give you your procedural safeguards. They are required by law to give you that at least once a year. And if you need it more than that, they have to at least tell you how to get it. Read over it, like Judy said, highlight things. There's going to be things in that might stand out more in that document than when you read the IDEA parent manual. But prior written notice, what it means is that you have a right to be given information in writing, and the notice has to be given to you at least 5 days in advance before they change anything, before they refuse something. So make sure you have that. If you're in an ARD meeting, a lot of times it's covered because it's in the ARD documents, but if it's during the year, they can't just decide, oh, we're going to take this kid and take them out of their current placement and put them in this other placement. Or we're not going to provide in-class support.
Whoa, hold on. Sorry, Leslie.
Okay.
There you go.
So they can't just do that. And that's what prior written notice is about. And it applies to evaluations, reevaluations, dismissal. Like if they wanted to dismiss your child from special education, I had another parent where that was the issue. And or even about the way that your child is provided a free and appropriate education. Sorry, I get to talking and then I don't do the slide.
You're good.
Okay, so prior written notice should also be provided when a parent revokes their consent for special education services. And I know that doesn't happen often, but sometimes parents decide that their student doesn't need special education services anymore. The prior written notice has to describe the action the school's going to take, or refuse to take, an explanation of why the school is proposing or refusing the action. They have to describe everything that helped them make that decision, with like the evaluation, assessment, records. Why are they making that decision? And then also include a statement about your protections under IDEA. And of course, tell you how to get a copy of the procedural safeguards. You want to, we talked about organization before and having a notebook or a binder or something. You know, you do want to keep those in your notebook, like maybe the IDEA parent manual, a copy of your procedural safeguards. So you have that there to refer to. And then it also gives you information about other organizations like Family to Family, maybe, or Disability Rights Texas, Partners Resource Network, organizations that can help you if you do need some help and you're in a disagreement. It also has to describe other choices or things that the art committee considered and the reasons why those choices were rejected. And a lot of times that's important because sometimes I see that, and maybe the disagreement is about placement, like is the child going to be included in regular ed? Well, how do they know regular ed with all the supports and services necessary is not going to work if they haven't tried any of that? So it would be really important to make sure whatever they write in there is true, because I had another art document that I was going through with a parent, and the parent was surprised to see what was written in that document, and it wasn't something that she agreed to. So it's really important. Okay, let's see. Sorry, the things cover up the top thing. So the notice should be in writing and in your native language and easy to understand. And if they don't have anything in writing in your native language, they have to translate it so you can understand it. There's a link to find your procedural safeguards. They in English and Spanish, but I think they have them in many languages, Judy, because I was looking at the procedural safeguards on this website tonight before I got on, and they do, yeah, there we go. They do have them in a lot of different languages.
Yes, they sure do.
Yeah, and this is Sped Text, and they have a great website with lots of resources for parents. You can call them, you can chat with them, or you can email them. I love to chat with them because I can copy and paste what we say back and forth and use that to have a conversation with the school. Well, I talked to Sped Text, and they know who, your school knows who Sped Text is. And they said this, and we talked about that in the last Wednesday about a child where they told him he had to go home and until the evaluation was complete, and that was totally wrong. So sometimes schools do get it wrong. I don't think they're bad people or they're trying to do anything wrong, but sometimes they just don't know.
And yeah, I think that's a really good point. We always encourage families to work collaboratively with art committees, with teachers, with schools. Sometimes people just don't know, and they don't realize they don't know. So it's really important as parents to make sure that you keep in touch with your teachers. Don't just wait for the art committee to find out how your child is doing. You know, we talked previously in our top tips for successful arts to make sure that you have communication. You know, it's not going to be every day, but at least, you know, every few days or once a week, so that you know how your child is doing.
Thanks, Judy.
Sure.
That is really important. Communication is so important. And then we've also talked in the past too about using the art agenda to keep organized during the meeting. That's very helpful. And we do have one of those on Texas Project First page. And I think that's helpful because it helps everybody stay, in the order, because there is an order to everything. We don't want to start talking about placement in the beginning. Like I have parents that'll call and say, oh, we have an ARD meeting coming up. It's our first ARD meeting to go over the evaluation. And they've already told me that my child's going to be in a life skills class or an early childhood class. Well, no, that decision is an ARD committee decision. And that's the last decision you make, because special education is a service. It's not a place. So you want to the ARD agenda does help you know the order of the meeting. And I know we've talked a lot about the order of the meeting in the past classes also. And we've also talked about this using all the different tools to help understand the special education process, like the IDEA handbook, the guide to the ARD process, your procedural safeguards. There's a parent companion that's great, especially if you have young kids. Another thing that's very helpful, and it's on the TEA website, the Texas Education Agency website, is a dispute resolution handbook. And I really like that too. So if you're in disagreement and maybe you haven't had the recess ARD to go back and try to work it out again, look at that resolution handbook, because it's going to give you a lot of tips and a lot of options of how you can resolve the disagreement. So if you disagree with the ARD committee, you can disagree. We're not telling you to disagree about every little thing, but it is okay to disagree if it's something very important and is going to make a big difference in your child's education. But when you disagree, you have to take the next step. A lot of parents say, well, I disagreed. And it's even documented in the ARD minutes that the parent disagrees. But then if you don't take the next step and do anything, that's the same thing as agreeing with them, because they get to do what they feel is appropriate if you don't use your procedural safeguards, which again is mediation, complaint, or due process. If you don't agree with an evaluation, you can request an independent evaluation at the school's expense. There are sample letters to do all of this stuff in the IDEA handbook. And there's also good information on Texas Project First. I like to look at a lot of different things because, it'll hit you a different way in the way it's said. You might read Texas Project First and not quite get it. And then you might look at the procedural safeguards and it's like, aha, that makes sense to me. So look at all the different things if you're not feeling like you are understanding something. If you don't agree with the program or the services, or with anything, you'll be given an opportunity to write that down. Now we say that, and I don't think they're just going to offer that up, but you can write that out. If you know you're going to be in disagreement, you can type that up. You can ask them to make it part of the ARD document, or you can ask the diagnostician to document your disagreement. Be sure you read everything. So many parents agree or disagree before they have the complete ARD document, and then they get home and it looks nothing like what they discussed in the meeting. So I would sit there at the end of the meeting and look over every page before, because I don't know about your district, the district I was in, they do a section and they would already have a little box checked that I agreed with everything above when we hadn't even gotten there yet. So it's really important to look that over, and you can look it up, sit there and look it over. Everybody can leave if you want, and you can sit there with the diagnostician, look it over, and then say, oh, okay, it looks like what we talked about, and the minutes reflect what we all said. It's not going to be every little detail. And then you can sign. Some people like to take it home and go over it with their spouse or with somebody else in their family. Maybe you have a friend or a relative that's in special education. So there's lots of ways to do it. And you need to sometimes you have to ask questions in different ways to get the answer that you're looking for, because sometimes they don't want to put in writing something. They don't want to answer the question directly, I guess I might say. So make sure things are documented. If you are not understanding what is happening at the ARD meeting, it might be a good time to disagree. And because you can always come back. Anytime you are in a disagreement, you're going to have a 10-day or more recess. And you're going to come back to the table, and everybody's going to get together and once again try to come to an agreement. And again, if you disagree, it's important to make sure your written statement is reflected in the IEP. If there's no statement of disagreement, the committee might think you're agreeing with them. It can be, and I know it's really hard for parents to disagree because you feel like they're not going to like you, or you're worried that they're going to retaliate. I had one parent worried that if I advocate for my kid, they're going to retaliate against my kid. And so I know it's hard, but you know what? If you respectfully disagree and you say, you know what, I'm my child's best advocate and I have to do what I feel is right for him or her. And so I hope you can understand. I know you guys are great, but I need to disagree, and let's all come back to the table and see if we can come to an agreement at the reconvene ARD. So don't be afraid. Of course.
Absolutely. I agree, Leslie. And Jennifer wrote something that I wanted to mention right now. I feel like they rushed the meeting and tell me at the beginning of the meeting, we only have 45 minutes.
Nope.
The teachers have to go back to class and be with the kids. Like, don't talk too much. And, you know, our response to that, Jennifer, is my heart goes out to them, but that's not your problem. And then you need to say to them, okay, I realize you have to get back to your classes so we can have part 2 of the ARD meeting. Let me know when we can do that.
When can we finish?
Yeah, when can we finish? And Jennifer, we know that is hard. I think that sometimes it's how people say things rather than what they're saying. And, you know, I respectfully disagreed many times during ARD meetings. And if I felt like they were trying to rush me, I would just say, okay, we all need to take a step back and move a little slower for me. You know, either I was up all night with my son, or I'm just getting over a cold. Don't worry, I'm not going to infect you. I just had a flat tire and barely got here on time. Whatever the reason is, not that you really even need to have a reason, but they can slow down. So Jennifer, we encourage you to say, I realize you have a time limit. This is really important for me to understand. So we need to take our time and then reconvene or come back to discuss the remaining parts that need to be covered.
Just make sure it's documented that you're not finished with the ARD, you know, because I don't want them to think, you know, that like this parent I talked to today or yesterday, they are trying to say it wasn't a continuation of the first ARD, it was a disagree. So because then your timelines get in there and you might need those timelines. So make sure it's documented and everybody agrees. And one thing we haven't talked about is recording your ARD meetings. You know, it's kind of hard to start recording your ARD meetings when things get contentious, because then they're like, oh, they get all nervous. And if you record, they have to record. So you may want to think, if you're new to the process, or if nothing's going wrong, oh, I need to record this. I want my husband to be able to listen to it, or whatever, or just do it from the very beginning. I have a hard time with these meetings. I like to go back and listen and make sure I understand. Whatever excuse you want to use. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that. Some people have wonderful relationships with their school. Just don't get too comfortable, because things change. Things change when you leave elementary school and go to middle school, and when you leave middle and go. So just never take anything for granted, So even if your people are great, you still want to make sure everything's documented, because somebody else, that person could resign the next day and somebody else could step in that's very different. So, you want the IEP to be something that somebody else could come in that doesn't know your child and look at the IEP and be able to pick up and move on. So let's see. If you disagree, a reconvene meeting, another meeting. We used to call them a 10-day recess ARD, but it could be more than 10 days. If you're disagreeing about an evaluation and you're getting a independent evaluation, the ARD committee could decide we're going to have that reconvene from the disagreement once you get the IEE done, and we have the report will come back and then reconvene. It could be 10 days. Sometimes it needs to be 10 days, because maybe something really not good is happening. So during the recess, both you and the school should be working together to gather more information. You can share information about why you disagreed and what you feel would be appropriate moving forward. Maybe you have some ideas. Maybe during that recess, you might, if you need to, you might want to call Disability Rights Texas or Partners Resource Network and see if somebody can go with you to the recess ARD. Or some people like to hire special education advocates. It's very expensive, but I know sometimes people do need to do that. You might have to disagree because they say, no, time's up, we're done, so there's two ways to skin a cat. You can have a continuation meeting, and if they say no and you're not comfortable signing, you can disagree, because then you come back and it might be a 10-minute ARD because you've had a chance to look everything over and you do agree with it. So there's lots of ways, and like Judy said, it's how you do it, and you want to be nice. Okay, state facilitated IEP meetings. So there's two different kinds of facilitations. Some school districts, they don't have to have their own facilitators. If they do, they have to let you know about this. And it might be somebody they have on staff, or it might be somebody they contract with to come in. And a facilitator is not there to take sides. They're impartial, and they're going to just help the two sides go through the agenda and communicate better and hopefully come to some kind of agreement. Then there's state facilitated IEP meetings, where you contact TEA, and there's a whole section on this. If you want to Google it, or it's very easy to understand, but it's a lot of steps. But if you want a state facilitated IEP, you have to do so within 5 days of your first disagreed ARD. So that's kind of what a facilitator does. That just keeps things in order. Sometimes that's good. Like if you have, I've had situations where I've had wonderful diagnosticians, and then I've had some that just wanted to take over and didn't want to follow the agenda and didn't want to let me talk, that's a situation where a facilitator could really help, because they're not going to let the school or the parent take over the meeting and not do something right. But they're not gonna, they don't have an opinion about your child or anything, or your child's education. So if you disagree at the first ARD, if you still disagree at the 10-day meeting or the recess ARD, the school is going to implement the IEP that they feel is appropriate, unless you take the next step. And that would be request mediation, file a complaint, or file for due process. If you do nothing, the school gets to do what they feel is best. Now, I will say, generally speaking, when you file one of these three things, the first thing the Texas Education Agency does is they tell the school, hey, can you go have a resolution meeting with this parent, which would be like a third meeting. It wouldn't really be an ARD meeting, but it would be a resolution meeting. And lots of times that's when things get worked out, because I think schools think parents aren't going to take time to this, or they don't know their rights, or whatever. Or sometimes maybe the school just doesn't know that they're not doing something right. So a lot of times, even though you file one of these three things, you may not even, it may get resolved before the Texas Education Agency has to get involved. And there are, sometimes mediation is a good mediation's a little different than facilitation. It's where they put both each side in a separate room and they go back and forth. It's kind of like, what'll it take? What'll it take? Can we meet somewhere in the middle? A complaint is very good if you have something that's cut and dry. Your child, I'm just making up examples that have happened in the past for different parents. Your child qualified for speech therapy. The school didn't have a speech therapist, and they wanted your child to just not have any speech therapy during the school year, which is totally inappropriate, and do group speech therapy in the summer to make up for it. So that's very cut and dry. No, this is what the school wants to do. It's not appropriate for my child. And this is what I want the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, to make them do. You have to put a remedy for your complaint. I want the TEA to pay for private speech therapy, and I want them to pay my mileage for me to drive back and forth to take them. So that's just one example. And there's a lot of things that are going to happen before you get in due process, but a lot of times people do have to file for due process, especially when it's when you want your child to stay put in whatever placement they're in and they're trying to move them. So anyway, that's just probably a lot of information right there. Oh, and then here we're going to talk about stay put. So I kind of went over that about stay put already. Stay put only applies if you file due process within 5 days of the disagree ARD. So there are timelines. It doesn't apply to mediation or a complaint. Stay put may not apply if it's a discipline thing where the student is putting themselves or others at risk. They're not going to let the child stay put if that's happening. So I know that's a lot of information, but we do want to have time for questions. And so if anybody has any questions, let us know.
And could you go to the next slide, please? Just so we can make sure that people complete the survey. So in fact, let me type it in the chat box before we get to questions, if I could. Hold on one second. Oh, and I thought I had it there. So let me look in a different spot, because I want to put it in the chat box. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay, so thank you so much, Leslie. Really great information. We realize that this is very, very confusing. We understand that. We just want to make sure that we have covered what to do if you disagree. And you can always reach out to us for further clarification. Jennifer asked, how do you know when they are implementing what was agreed on in the IEP in the classroom? I think it's all on paper and not being followed in class, as evidenced by the things teachers say and do. This is regarding accommodations. And Leslie, before you answer that, I just want to comment on that. So I understand your concern, Jennifer. I think that it's every parent's concern. Are the accommodations really being followed through? One of the accommodations that my son had, and this was in high school, was he needed to leave about 5 to 7 minutes prior to the class ending, because he went to a huge high school. And when they're changing classes and the sensory overload and the crowds and everything, way too much for him, way too much for him. And fortunately, yes, my child at the time, and he still is, verbal. So I could say, you know, how did it go? Did you get to leave this class early? You know, did you get extra time on this? And I was able to ask my child questions. What I often would do is email the teacher after the ARD meeting and say, I know that you're juggling a lot of students. I just want to explain to you the accommodations that were approved of by the ARD committee. And that way I knew they had it. And if you could just confirm that you know, have this email, that'd be great. I always knew when there was a substitute teacher because my kids came home upset because the substitute teacher isn't going to know what those accommodations are. And that can just send our kids into orbit. But definitely review them with each teacher. Go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I mean, I think a parent is going to know, kind of know when something's not right. My son couldn't tell me anything, so I would get information. Sometimes there were times where a para would tell me things. There were times, of course, I couldn't tell anybody that she's the one that told me, or other students would say, oh, Miss Leslie, I saw Cameron today and this was happening. And so that, and I think parents have to go up and observe what's going on in the classroom. It's hard to say they're not doing this or that until you actually see it yourself. And you got to be a detective. You got to ask questions, and you have to ask direct questions too. And I know I've told my story about when I went up to meet the teacher or whatever, and I asked to see, you know, I had a parent tell me that they went up to observe, and they asked the teacher to show the visual schedules that they were supposed to be using with the student, and she didn't have them. So, you know, you're going to have to ask questions. And then if they're not, I think Judy had a good idea about emailing the teacher. Make sure at the beginning of the year, or if your child's teachers change, you give them a copy of that and maybe give them more details, because a lot of IEPs have pretty much the same accommodations. In some schools, I see they check all of them just to cover it. But what does that accommodation look like for your student? And if they're not providing them, you're going to have to. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Jasmine, if you could please keep yourself muted. I know sometimes it's hard. You might be on a cell phone, but we'd appreciate it. Thank you. And if you want to go to the next slide, and I put our email addresses in the chat box. That's what we're here for. It may take us a few days to get back to you because we are busy, but we want to help you. We want to make sure that you're getting the support that you need. We have gone through it ourselves, and we know what it's like for other parents to go through it. We never claim to have all of the answers. If you don't know the answer, we will try to find you the right answer.
Yeah, and a lot of people have said, you know, like when we get to the question and answers and they have questions, hey, feel free to email us or call us so we can talk about it further. You know, not like Judy said, we don't have all the answers, but we may have some ideas. And a lot of times it's hard to just answer a question until we know more details, you know, because like every student's so different. So like what looked right for Cameron looked very different for Judy's son, Ryan.
Absolutely.
But I did want to mention too, I don't know if we mentioned this, if your child is in a segregated classroom, or I don't know, what's the other word we would use for that? Life skills or early childhood, a class where they only have students with IEPs, you do have the right to ask that cameras be put in that room, and it should be on your school district special education website. Not that you can go look at it and watch them, but that way if anything ever happens, any incident, then they would be able to go back, you know, and look at what's going on, because you know, when your child's in a class where nobody can go home and tell anybody anything, you know, it puts kids at more risk. So I do recommend that you ask for cameras in the classroom, and you do have to ask for it every year.
So, if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Sure. Any other questions? We want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's 7:03. We truly appreciate the opportunity to work with everyone, to have you join us. We are going to be repeating these classes again in November. November 7th is going to be the first class, the session 1, what you need to know about special education, and that will be offered at 12 o'clock. The second class, Top Tips for Successful ARDS, will be on Wednesday at noon. And then the final class, which is repeating the class that we had tonight, will be on Thursday at noon. We wanted to offer this evening option because we realize that parents have varying schedules. And if you want to join us again for the next and last session, we'd love to have you join us.
Let me say one thing, because there was one other question, and it's about a student with autism. So students with autism have an autism supplement in their IEP. If you don't know, if you have a child with autism and you have never seen the autism in your child's IEP, that's a problem, because that autism supplement helps you get things that you might not get, and it should be very specific to your child. And one of those 11 things is extended school year services, or what you're calling summer school. And I went to the training on the autism supplement back when it first came out, and the people presenting, who were autism specialists, said they could think of very few kids on the autism spectrum who wouldn't need extended school year services. Now, it could look very different. It's not supposed to be a cookie cutter program that everybody fits into. Maybe your child just needs speech therapy over the summer. Maybe your child needs to go to a regular summer school class like his typical peers and have support in that class. Maybe your child needs to go to one of the social skills classes in the summer. So that you have to use that autism supplement to get what you need. And if anybody wants to email me, I'll be happy to send you Cameron's autism supplement from when he was in school. Of course, it's going to be very different from what your child's might look like, but when you see it, you see that how specific it was written for my son, and that's what yours should look like.
And Erica, I would definitely reach out to us, because when they tell you, you know, he couldn't be accepted into extended school year services because there wasn't anybody to help him, that's not a reason.
Mm-mm.
That's not a good answer. So please, please reach out to us. Do you have a resource for how to find an advocate to attend the ARD with a parent? Yes, we do. Please email us and we can send you a list, and we can make, we can send that to you, and then you can choose. It's not as though we can suggest one over the other, but absolutely, we would be happy to share our list with you.
Yeah, and another thing you can do too, the list is great to have, but if you belong to any of the special needs Facebook groups, like the Katie Autism Facebook group is a great resource. There's the Houston Autism group. You can ask. I mean, everybody's going to have different opinions, but every time I see somebody ask on those pages, 2 or 3 names always come up several times. So those people must be doing something right. And Jennifer, if you will email me, I'm sure I have something in my resources that I'd be if you'll remind me, because I'll forget by tomorrow. If you'll just remind me, and I'll see what I can find for you.
Yeah, we'd be happy to help. It can be very challenging with traumatic brain injuries, and yes, we try to find something for everyone. Well, thank you all so much. We truly, truly appreciate you joining us.